I mean, look, I can pull metrics out of the air to whatever 8 million transactions over the last week. I don't know. My mom has 4 oranges. I don't know. I mean, these numbers don't matter. You're not comparing like with like, right? Algorand's been around for like a couple of years. Ethereum's been around since the start of this thing.
Welcome, everybody, into Crypto Project of the Year from Coinage, the only community-owned, award-winning media DAO steered by our NFT holders and backed by the co-founder of Netflix. Excited to be highlighting two giants in the crypto space today and two great nominees in the running to be crowned Crypto's Project of the Year. Of course, you can vote, as always, on not just our awards, but also our coverage at Coinage.media. And today, super stoked to bring on with us builders, founders, leaders in this little celebration of projects. And today we got Algorand and Arbitrum represented today by our two guests, John Woods, the CTO at Algorand Foundation, joining us once again on the show, as well as the co-founder of Off-Chain Labs, Stephen Goldfeder, here with us as well. Stephen, John, good to see you. If you're listening on the space as well with us, you can throw a like on the space. You can retweet the space to let everyone know that we've got two big projects on Coinage today. I'm the host of Coinage, coming to you live from Brooklyn, New York City. Excited to be bringing you this coverage along with the support of our sponsor, BitGo, the strongest foundation in crypto, providing regulated custody, financial services, and core infrastructure alike. I want to give them a shout out as we kick this off. And again, remind everybody that you will be the ones who decide today among Algorand and Arbitrum who moves ahead in our celebration of the top projects in crypto. So we got to learn a little bit more about them. That's what we got to do here on the space today. And John, you've been on Coinage before, so I might invite you to kick things off here and say congrats on being nominated as a Project of the Year. And for those who might not know what Algorand's all about, I give the floor to you first to explain a little bit about what you guys have been up to this year.
Well, thank you very much, Team Coinage. Hello, friends. It's John Woods here, the CTO at the Algorand Foundation. I appreciate your consideration with making Algorand potentially the blockchain of the year. And so Algorand is a killer layer 1 blockchain. And what that means is you can build applications for Algorand. It's a little bit like an operating system like Windows or Linux or Mac OS, except for Algorand's layer 1 allows your app to run globally in a decentralized context. And this allows Algorand to imbue your application with a bunch of characteristics that are just not possible on traditional operating systems. And we can make sure when we're running certain classes of application on technologies like Algorand that the veracity of the execution is preserved. And so this is particularly useful where your application benefits from decentralization, benefits from censorship resistance, benefits from ensuring that it's operating in a permissionless environment. And Algorand harnesses some very cool cryptographic and technical primitives in order to provide that experience for your application. And I'm looking forward to telling you about some of the things we've been up to this year, both in terms of building out Algorand as a protocol, but also empowering users to use it easily and to build on it trivially.
Yeah, I'm excited to dig into, I guess, maybe some of the more technical components, as we've highlighted a bit of those before. But I should shout out both of you guys as being basically, if you go to CoinMarketCap or any other sizing some of these projects up, both Arbitrum and Algorand, they're basically head-to-head in market size that way if you want to measure it. Of course, there's plenty of different ways to measure projects, which we're going to get into. And Stephen, I'd turn it to you. You haven't been on Coinage before, so I'm excited to have you on with us today. Thank you so much for taking the time. And obviously, Arbitrum is one of those projects that continues to be spotlighted when it comes to scaling Ethereum as a layer 2. So there are differences to get into today versus layer 1s and layer 2 scaling solutions. But first, I just say to you, thanks for coming on and maybe give a little bit of the spiel on what Arbitrum's trying to solve.
Hey, Zach, thanks for having me here. Yeah, really excited to be here for the first time and excited to tell everyone a little more about Arbitrum. So Arbitrum stemmed from this early vision, actually, when I was a PhD student at Princeton and my co-founder, Ed Felton, was a professor there. This goes back to about 2013 when Ed was reading an initial paper on smart contracts and realized that the systems that we had, the layer 1 systems, had trouble scaling. and was interested in, how do we fix this? And if you look back from the very, very first mention in Arbitrum on YouTube, you'll find a video from that a class semester in fall 2014 at Princeton. And the reason I like to mention that date is because it actually predates Ethereum. Right, so Arbitrum was, live and well in some sense, in a research sense at least, before Ethereum existed, and we were asking ourselves these questions. Okay, we have these smart contract systems. How do we scale them? And that's exactly what Arbitrum tries to do. Is it tries to scale via layer two a blockchain system, and in particular, we are very, very strong believers in Ethereum as the base layer of choice for smart contracts because of its robust security and its decentralization. But the problem is, scaling while maintaining that security and decentralization are difficult. And that's where Arbitrum comes in from a technical perspective. And that's where the whole layer two paradigm is, where you're able to keep the security and decentralization on layer one, add the scale on layer two. And Arbitrum, particularly, we'll get into all this, I'm sure, but had a very big year this year. Was the launch of the technology really flew on its own for the first time with the launch of the DAO, Arbitrum DAO, and the Arbitrum Foundation. The Arbitrum community is stronger than ever, and both executed and upcoming technical updates that are in the works or on testnet are really, really super exciting and just bringing the ecosystem forward. So excited to dig into all those different verticals today.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you again for coming on. I think that that's kind of one of the things as we kick this off, right? It's always tricky. Everyone's always asking us, is this the first time we're doing this? But basically, our NFT holders will be able to vote on the outcome of Crypto Project of the Year, and 16 projects being featured throughout the rest of November into December and into next year. But basically, there are different metrics. You can look at price of tokens, perhaps, if you want to use that as a metric. I don't know. Everyone's free to vote on their own. Or the size of the community or projects, and especially what's slated for 2024, which we'll get into, I guess, some of the alpha leaks, if there are any to offer later on in this spotlight. But John, let me turn it back to you for kind of how you've been measuring what Algorand's been able to do in 2023, notable projects or maybe advancements of the ecosystem that you've seen, and what your guys' community is super excited about within the Algorand walls, I should say. What has you most excited, I guess, from looking back on the year?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think this year for Algorand was significant. We laid the bedrock foundation to build for 2024. Most significantly, the foundation built out its DevRel team. So we have a world-class concierge-like DevRel team that work with projects on a one-to-one basis to give them a white glove experience when they're building on the chain. And so when you're building an Algorand, you don't have to build alone. And so that team has really flourished. It's come to the foundation in 2023, and it's been built out. So we have a bunch of engineers and architects that are happy to work with projects that want to build on our layer one. I think probably, though, the most significant thing for me, and we can talk about some of the things we rolled out in the protocol, because in terms of the protocol, we increased the number of transactions per second to 10,000. We dropped the block time to about 3 seconds, or just over 3 seconds. We added a number of novel cryptographic improvements, including the addition of Falcon, which is a lattice-based post-quantum signature scheme, which enables quantum-resistant security for the history of the chain. So we've done some kind of cool, geeky stuff. And we've also added some cool things to the AVM. So the CPU at the heart of Algorand that runs your code can do some more interesting things. It has some upgraded instructions. But I think the most important thing we did this year was look at the dev tools. So Algorand was already great. It was great when I arrived, and I've worked professionally on Ethereum. I've worked professionally on Cardano, and so I have a good understanding of those ecosystems and a good understanding of the broad trends within the industry. And one of the things that, for me, was something we needed to focus on around Algorand was that developer experience. How difficult is it for a user to come with no previous experience and with an idea for a business, an idea for an application, and then realize that application? How difficult is it for them to make a first attempt at coding it and get it running on the decentralized operating system that is Algorand? And it wasn't as easy as we would have liked. And so in 2023, we released a product we call AlgoKit, which is a soup to nuts single tool that gives you everything you need to build, test, and deploy your applications on Algorand. And it's been a tectonic shift in terms of the developer experience for Algorand, and one which we're hopeful will result in an explosion of new ideas on the chain in 2024. Of course, we're not stopping there. In 2024, we're doing a lot more with AlgoKit and the developer user experience.
Yeah, and the progress has been exciting to watch. I do think, I suppose, if we are pairing these two to look at through the lens of how difficult it is to build something within your own environment as an L1 versus perhaps building on what has been established in Ethereum, that is a distinction, I think, to make here, Stephen, when you look at what Arbitrum's been able to do this year and how you guys have made progress, because I think I remember back to ETH Denver, it was the first interaction I had with Arbitrum in terms of using tokens to buy food at the food trucks at ETH Denver. I think Arbitrum, and I, got a stick of gum that was Arbitrum branded. But I mean, what does it come to in the strides that you guys have made at Arbitrum, and I guess growing your own ecosystem, because there are a lot of layer 2s out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been a really, again, fantastic year. It's really those three verticals for me, which is technical, governance, and community. And I'll go briefly on technical. Yeah, when you're building a layer 2, you're sort of more constrained, right? So Arbitrum 2 years ago was the only layer 2 out there that was actually trying to just give you the exact and full EVM experience. Others had custom compilers, or they weren't trying to build smart contracts. We said, hey, can we build a layer 2 that just looks like the layer 1? On layer 1 territory, it's easy, but on layer 2, you have to build this proving apparatus that proves to the layer 1 what happens on a layer 2. So you have to build this whole machine just to build a blockchain that looks like layer 2, the layer 1. And Arbitrum was able to successfully pull that off. And I think that's actually one of the reasons for a lot of Arbitrum's success, where it just made it super easy for developers that had experience building on Ethereum and other projects or and other EVM chains to just build an Arbitrum and have the security of Ethereum via the proving apparatus. So Arbitrum stands out when it comes to other layer 2s. It has its full proof system built out. Believe it or not, that's not a given where you actually have the full proving that gives you Ethereum security, that allows you to derive this Ethereum security. So Arbitrum has that built out. But on technical, three other things to call out that we did this year, which I think are really exciting. We launched the code for Arbitrum Stylus, which says, hey, so EVM is great, but can we go beyond EVM, right? The reason I mentioned that I think we're successful is because we gave the EVM experience to developers. But if you look at the world of developers out there, there are about 20,000 or so estimated to be Solidity developers, that's the EVM language, 3 million Rust developers, 12 million C++ developers. Can we actually have a tool set that speaks to these developers as well? So Arbitrum Stylus does just that, which is on the Arbitrum chains, it gives you the ability to write smart contracts in all these other languages. And again, builds our technology to these other developers. And the cool thing is these languages can interact with each other synchronously and seamlessly. And the whole proving apparatus, the thing that gets the security of Ethereum, is fully built out as well. That's number one. Number two is the launch of Arbitrum Bold, which is a new validation protocol for Arbitrum that we put out code and paper for that allows anyone to validate Arbitrum chains, which is like the holy grail of security. And number three is also there is a proliferation of Arbitrum Orbit chains. These are other chains in the Arbitrum ecosystem. So Arbitrum is the leading ecosystem, a layer 2 ecosystem that exists today when it comes to adoption. But increasingly, application developers are wanting to go beyond their applications and say, hey, we want our own chain. And we have this program which does, dozens of chains that we're working with, well over a dozen already announced chains that have say, hey, we're building our own Arbitrum chain, leveraging the Arbitrum technology stack, ultimately secured by Ethereum, but it gives you sort of this priority lane on Ethereum. So that's, I think, some of the technical updates. On the community side also, Arbitrum has seen a fantastic continuation of its growth. If you look, actually, one metric I love is ETH bridged onto different chains. If you take the amount of ETH, and this is a significant metric because remember, we're scaling Ethereum and it's those that use ETH that are big believers, and the fees on the Arbitrum chains are actually ETH. And if you look at ETH bridge and you take every other layer 2 ecosystem out there, sum them all up, you take Arbitrum has significantly more than every single other layer 2 ecosystem combined in ETH on its chain. If you take DEX volume, Arbitrum is the number 2, not layer 2, chain when it comes to volume on decentralized exchanges to Ethereum and Arbitrum. If you take transaction volume, just 3 days ago, Arbitrum did 2.4 million transactions, significantly more than Ethereum. And I can go on, but just about every metric, Arbitrum is really doing its mission. It's scaling, but it's doing that on top of Ethereum and giving you the scale without compromising the security and decentralization.
All right, we've thrown some numbers out there, so we're getting some data points for our community to have something to go off of in terms of figuring out who they might want to advance in this. And of course, the vote is now live at coinage.media/vote, so that is open. I will call that out because as a community-owned outlet, none of this is in my control. So we invite everybody to have their voice heard. And John, I think, when you come to numbers, And you think about some of that stuff, maybe less technical in any challenge for anything, whether it's an L2 or an L1, and the idea of community and distinction. I think that that's always pretty fascinating to look at in terms of what's being, I guess, leveraged by Algorand's tech and where you're seeing some of the most enthusiasm, because it could be gaming, it could be DeFi, it could be anything. What exactly did you see in 2023 when it comes to what Algorand's maybe moving the ball on?
Sure. And, I think Arbitrum has done a great job. I spent nearly 3 years working professionally on Ethereum, and I launched some of the biggest enterprise grade applications Ethereum had back in 2017, 2018. I was the lead architect on all of Consensus's major engagements. And so we were building apps that were being used by real companies. And I know from the sleepless nights of how difficult it is to scale on Ethereum. And I think Arbitrum has done an exceptional job at fixing a problem. But it's a problem that shouldn't exist. If your layer one is fit for purpose, then you don't need scaling solutions like Arbitrum, in my view. And I know that sounds a little bit provocative, but that's strongly how I feel. I think, though, that there's no denying that Ethereum, of course, has the first mover advantage, and indeed, it certainly has the predominant, value locked on chain. I mean, that's clear. For me, I think rather the moves we're making around AlgoKit are probably the most important we can make. Ensuring that it's easy for businesses, whether it's businesses like Quantos, who just launched a central bank backed or approved digital euro on Algorand, or whether it's businesses like Travelex that do real world assets on Algorand's chain, issuing plane tickets and allowing resale of those tickets. These businesses have had to previously deal with developer friction that ultimately had stifled their ability to come to chain quickly. And by bringing AlgoKit, by bringing tools that enable a seamless, simple, and straightforward journey for developers from concept to mainnet, we're expecting to see a huge growth in terms of the TVL, in terms of the number of applications building on the chain. I think for
Yeah.
2023, the story of success was really around real world assets, whether that was tokenization of housing or tokenization of generally real world asset classes like Travelex. That's where we've seen the most growth. And I think as well, another thing that's very important to point out is that since the start of Algorand, which was only really in 2021, because even the smart contract language and the basic tooling, the assembly tooling around the language were only released towards the end of 2021. We've essentially seen explosive growth in terms of the number of people building on the chain. And at this point, we've had over 1 billion blocks without a single moment of downtime, which is also significant, because when you're building enterprise grade apps on a decentralized system, you need to make sure that you're doing so on one that has good uptime.
Yeah, Stephen, I'm curious to kind of get your take on some of the things mentioned there as well, and I'll give you a chance to reply, because I do think it is interesting to look at maybe the solutions offered by both L2s and L1s, and maybe how it's going after some of the same pie when it comes to scaling Ethereum, having to compete with other L2s, versus maybe building some of the solutions in your own environment as an L1. I mean, how do you look at it? Maybe an open chance to respond for what the solution offered by Arbitrum is differentiated by versus Algorand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also have a lot of respect for Algorand. In fact, I have my PhD in cryptography, and I've always looked up to Silvio Macaulay as, really, there's so much talk around zero knowledge in the space, but few know that actually the, instrumental and foundational role that Silvio had in zero knowledge proving systems. So definitely only respect for Algorand and their ecosystem. When it comes to the adoption of the chain, though, I have to disagree with John around, the problem without a need. I think that there's a fundamental problem that does have a need, and Ethereum has some significant advantages to other layer ones. And, it's all an experiment, and there's nothing wrong with experimenting with different technology, but I'll tell you why I believe Ethereum is on the right side of this, which is security and decentralization are critical. We know how to scale Ethereum on the base layer. We can look at other layer ones and actually use Ethereum's code and just turn some knobs and make it work. But what happens is, as you make it harder to run an Ethereum node, the barrier to entry increases, right? So now if it takes a data center rather than a regular computer to run a node, well, all those nodes that are running on regular computers fall out, and you automatically have more centralization. It's de facto centralization because you say, hey, anyone could buy a data center and take place in this. And I'm using like extremities here just to be clear. I'm not suggesting that you need a data center to partake in the Algorand ecosystem, but I'm trying to illustrate the point that there's a lot of benefit to have an Ethereum, a layer one that's very minimal and allows extreme participation. So everyone can contribute to the decentralization, ultimately the security of this chain. I think that's one of the critical things that Arbitrum solves, which is scaling Ethereum, why I'm so bullish on Ethereum. But the second thing, that's the technology, but there's also the community. Ethereum has the strongest community in crypto, in the smart contract space, certainly, right? Bitcoin and Ethereum, but in smart contracts, Ethereum has certainly the strongest community. And there's a lot there in mindshare. Where are people developing? Where are the application developers going? A
Does
lot
it
of
start
that's
to
the Ethereum
divide it
community.
though? I mean, that's one of my main questions. Is does it start to get divided by so many layer twos building on top of Ethereum, or where maybe some of that juice, some of that value extraction gets shared across Arbitrum, but then also Optimism or Polygon?
It's a great question. So what I'll tell you is this: that you can look at Arbitrum as a layer two, and Arbitrum has 54% market share among the dozens of layer twos on Ethereum. It has dominant market share, it has dominant TVL, dominant transaction volume. But if you discount everything I said and say I don't believe in layer two, we could just look at Arbitrum as a blockchain, right? So I have pulled up on my screen here. I have DeFi Llama, and I'll code two metrics. So we'll look at Arbitrum and say Algorand. Arbitrum, when it comes, and this is not among layer twos, this is among blockchains. Arbitrum is the number two blockchain in DeFi Llama when it comes to DEX volume. It did $458 million in volume in the past 24 hours. And I'm just looking for Algorand here. Looks like it's a number 39, which with 621,000. If I do the same thing for total value locked on the protocol, we have Arbitrum as number 4 among blockchains with 2.11 billion locked. This is locked in DeFi, to be clear, and 60 million at Algorand, the number 33. So I personally think that there's a ton of benefit from the layer 2 and the way we're building this technology, not building a layer 1. But even if you want to disregard all that machinery, as a blockchain, Arbitrum stands on its own as one of the top blockchains out there that competes very, very well against other layer 1s and layer 2s in its own right, even if you don't care about the fact that it's a layer 2.
Yeah, I was just looking at DeFi Llama stats as well here, so we were quick to pull those up and trying to match you going on. John, I'll also turn it back to you, though, because there are so many metrics, and it's really hard to
Sure.
keep track of.
I mean, look, I can pull metrics out of the air to whatever 8 million transactions over the last week. I don't know. My mom has 4 oranges. I don't know. I mean, these numbers don't matter. You're not comparing like with like, right? Algorand's been around for like, a couple of years. Ethereum's been around since the start of this thing. I think also, there's no doubt, like Ethereum 100% has the biggest TVL, and people can't use it because it's too slow and expensive. So of course that goes to the best scaling solution that it possibly has, which is probably is Arbitrum. So it doesn't surprise me that they have large numbers in terms of TVL. That's great. But what I think is more important is this is not battle of the TVL. This is not like who's been around longer and who has more, mind share. This is battle of the tech, battle of the blockchain. And what I'm saying is, if you objectively look at Algorand, what it's doing as a layer 1 blockchain, if you look at its consensus primitive, the VRF invented again by Macaulay, the ZKP, the zero knowledge proof genius, it allows, by definition, it encourages staking. It encourages staking to be done at the individual level, not like in a delegated proof of stake, not like an Ethereum style proof of stake, but where the individual truly decentralizes the network. And again, Algorand is true to the vision of blockchain, the thesis of blockchain, which is decentralization, censorship resistance, permissionlessness, self-sovereignty, and we have to do that even when we're looking at block production.
Yeah,
and on top of that, if you take just one last point, if you take the EVM is great. It's like the x86, I think, of the crypto space. It's like the Intel chip of the crypto space. But there are things we can learn that we've learned over the last decade, and they're things that Algorand has taken advantage of. And so when you look at the AVM, the Algorand virtual machine, and I think Arbitrum calls itself the AVM too, the Arbitrum virtual machine. But if you look at the Algorand virtual machine AVM, it focuses on speed and precision. And so there are quite literally things you can do on Algorand that are not possible to do on Ethereum in the same way. And when we bring Python in the next kind of 15 days, and people can start writing smart contracts in Python for Algorand, I think we're going to be stealing a little bit of that TVL away from Arbitrum and the boys.
All right, now we're getting into some things to look forward to next year, which is some of the alpha leaks we want to highlight on this. I do want to budget time for some of that, not just always looking back or looking at what's been done. And I will give you the proof in the pudding there, John, when it comes to maybe time to operate and still early for a lot of the projects we've been spotlighting. But let's turn to community, because there are a couple replies here from people listening in around events and I guess, spotlighting community in the way of developers, but also use cases. And I said, distinguishing there, I think, is going to be important for this specific celebration of top projects in crypto, just because every project is really trying to figure out what these blockchains can be used for. And Stephen, I'm not sure if there's something that's distinct there from what you've seen versus other projects in use cases on Arbitrum. And this could be a personal question too, just in terms of the wider space and Web3 in general. But what has you maybe most excited about where this technology moves forward in 2024?
Yeah, so where I'm super excited about, I think we're going to see a few things. One is, I think the current giants are here to stay and are growing. So by that I mean, like, DeFi, I think, is going to continue to be a very significant driver of the usage. It's definitely the number one use case in Arbitrum One today, and Arbitrum is a leading DeFi ecosystem. But we're also seeing a ton. This is like younger, but also extremely strong and very, very powerful builders, and that's always an early signal, is in the gaming space. And if you look back at like blockchain gaming, once upon a time in this space means, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, not too long. um, it was like blockchain first and then game. And there weren't like, the people building games were super excited about blockchains, and the games weren't very good in many cases. But now we're actually seeing, like, top gaming studios coming and building fantastic experiences and optimizing for good games. And we have in the Arbitrum ecosystem a second blockchain called Arbitrum Nova, which, speaking about numbers, doesn't do that well when it comes to TVL, because it's really optimized at social and gaming. And that's a number which many of these gaming projects that are actually trying to build good games and not doing the, like, play to earn things that we saw in the last cycle are not optimizing. But it has fantastic high profile launches there. And I think we're also seeing extremely strong NFT communities, like your own community. You mentioned the voting with NFTs. I think we're first understanding the power of what you can do with any NFTs and how you can organize there. And I'll, speaking on community, which was your question, which was you mentioned, I think that's one of the also really interesting things about the Arbitrum ecosystem, and that the community is not monolithic. There are these sub communities, right? There's Treasure DAO, which has its massive own community. There's GMX, which has its own community. And the best place to see this is in Arbitrum governance. So Arbitrum has bottom-up governance, right? Self-executing governance. The DAO directly controls the treasury, and they choose what to do with it. They choose how to deploy it. And you have these different factions and are arguing and warring, and it looks like chaos, but it's actually really nice to see. And you have all these people that are united by being in the Arbitrum community, but they also have all their sub-communities with different interests. And that, to me, is one of the biggest health indicators of this. And one of the things I'm most excited to see develop is the development of these sub communities that are just united by being on the Arbitrum chains.
Yeah, I think that is exciting. And chaos is a good way to describe how a lot of the projects in our space, and ourself included as a decentralized autonomous organization in the media space, it is always chaos in general. But, it's an experiment. And I think that that's kind of one of the pieces that both projects, or any project that we're spotlighting on this, really is an experiment. And John, I don't know if there's, a lot of people shouting out, speaking of community, a lot of the people in the algo community are talking about events and what you guys have done. I know there were a few, I think, this year. I don't know if there's like one specific region to shout out. That has been interesting. We're going to spotlight Avalanche later on in this competition, sure, and they have a huge focus on Asia Pacific. But I don't know if there's anything distinguishing there around what you've seen in Algorand and what you have planned for next year.
Sure. So this year we took on, as part of the Algorand Foundation's executive team, someone dedicated, Min Wei is her name, to community and ecosystem. And so we now have an entire team under Min's leadership, working with the community, working with the ecosystem, trying to drive things like simple. This might sound simple, but trying to drive an open source ethos within the ecosystem. Because again, we want to see people from the ecosystem, from the community, drive the development of both the protocol, the dev tools, and other things. Because eventually these foundations, we have to fade back and take a smaller role and allow the community to own this stuff. And that's truly where it needs to be. I also would say, having worked across, crypto is super tribal, right? It's like football clubs or whatever. And so, I've worked on Ethereum, Cardano, Algorand. When I was in those ecosystems, everyone was really lovely to me. And even now that I'm with Algo, I still get a lot of love from the Cardano people, because they're good people. I would say, though, I would try to reduce the tribalism. I hate this kind of idea that there's these like hard lines between us. And it's like, where, you have community members that will literally argue with each other all day on Twitter. I think it's so counterproductive. And of course, I understand, when you've got some journalists that come out and they have an agenda, or they're being paid by a certain entity, and of course their bag is heavy, and they do their best to create drama. I understand that's never going to go away, but for the real people, not the people who are paid shills and the people who are paid to sabotage, but for the actual general community members, I would love to see more harmony. And try to enjoy the sport of crypto collectively, rather than be as tribal about it.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, especially, maybe I'm a little bit hypocritical here because we've designed this as a bracket, but at the same time, it's really not a competition so much as it is bringing you guys on to talk about what you guys have accomplished independently today. Because, to be honest, a lot of our NFT holders probably do have big bags of Arbitrum and Algorand, and it's not necessarily one over the other, but it is learning a lot about this. And I do think that that's why I'm excited to chat with you guys, because obviously, like Steven said, there's a lot of different solutions to a lot of different problems. Everyone's trying it out. And, seeing where people win and seeing where people lose, I think not only solves some of the questions for individual builders in these ecosystems, but for everyone writ large. And I guess that's a good way to segue into just kind of how you guys are looking at, my question was getting at maybe regulation in some of these environments. And John, you and I have talked about that here in the US and how it might not matter in other jurisdictions. And Steven, I don't know how Arbitrum or, Off-Chain Labs maybe looks at some of that stuff when it comes to building, not just for US regulations in mind, but also just kind of how this space has exploded even in the bear market. I don't know if you've maybe changed your views on some of that stuff outside the US, given what we've seen this year.
I think, the technology is global, and the technology has to be global for it to take off. And some of the uncertainties we're seeing in certain jurisdiction is because there was this revolution, right? This thing popped up, and it popped up more quickly than regulators could understand it in many cases. And in many cases, they misunderstood it or continue to misunderstand it. And I think education here is one of the primary ways that we need as a community to really explain who we are, what we are. We're not shadowy supercoders, but we're actually trying to change the world and build revolutionary technology that really can change people's lives in all over the world. And it's ironically in some of the, it's some of the most profound early use cases are in like the developing countries, where it's really very much changing lives, and people are able to use crypto as payments. One of the earliest and simplest applications is actually making a real difference. So I think we're early on. I think that's the theme here. And I would totally agree that there's so much more that we can do together by not being tribal and working right. We have a shared mission to educate people about what we're doing, and we can argue around minor differences. But if you look at we all understand, whether you're myself or work on a different Ethereum layer 2 or work on an alternative layer 1. If you're in this space building, it's probably because you believe in what you're doing. And like you said, we're trying to figure out the best way to build this. I believe very, very strongly that the decisions that we've made are the correct ones. John believes very strongly that the decisions that Algorand made are the correct ones, and that's the way it should be. And we're going to continue to see how this plays out and continue to provide value by seeing what works. And, we all have our theses there, but ultimately we all should also understand that I think we do best by building on top of each other and building together and really, again, educating others. And I think that will be the key to regulation, just understanding. And that's how I approach this. We build technology. That's what we do. We use technology that's transformative, and the best thing we can do is help people, whether they're regulators or not, understand the positive use cases of this transformative technology.
Yeah, amen to that. That is also, by the way, not to shill our own project here, but that is exactly why Coinage is here as a community-owned outlet steered by NFT holders. John, to your point, we're not really making a lot of money here in this space, and we don't take on ads in the same way. I mean, BitGo's here as a sponsor in supporting the educational piece of having everyone on to spotlight projects this year. But really, honestly, it's the mints that go towards the DAO in letting people vote, and this is a good example of maybe how NFT holders can steer the agenda. We're only merely scratching the surface, honestly, by highlighting both these projects today, Algorand and Arbitrum, on an hour of y'all's time, and depending on how this vote goes, which is now open at coinage.media, will determine which one we continue to drill down and spotlight some of the things that both John and Steven are talking about when it comes to community. But in that ethos, in that vein, we also want to give the opportunity for you guys to maybe clear up some of the misconceptions about your projects, because we've seen, to John's point, sometimes stuff gets thrown around there that's not really factual. And John, I'm sure Algorand would be in that camp too, as every project is. Sometimes things get
It's
misreported, sometimes things are misconstrued.
yeah.
I don't know if there's anything that annoys you as someone who's in the Algorand community that you'd want to clear up.
I mean, there's so much stuff, but it's impossible to argue with every moron on the internet. I mean, I like 20 years ago, I used to try to do it or whatever on dig.com, but I've given up. I try to come out of the woodwork and give people a slap if they're talking too much FUD. But I mean, I think a lot of the folks who are detractors don't really get the core technology. They don't understand the mathematics. They don't understand the fundamental cryptographic primitives. They don't understand the distributed systems engineering. And so I can understand it's a lot easier to just talk because you're being paid than it is to go and do what Stephen has done and get a PhD in cryptography and actually understand this stuff. And so we can't expect everyone to be as educated as Stephen or others in the ecosystem who have good takes. I think the usual stuff with Algorand is that it's not decentralized. Yes, it is. I think we can get more decentralized. I think that it's a spectrum ultimately, of course. You could look at aspects of Bitcoin and say, well, the mining pools are a little bit centralized around Bitcoin because there's like 3 or 4 of them that have most of the hashing power, and all it takes is a subpoena to a couple of those firms, and all of a sudden you've got a centralization risk. There's parts of Algorand that we're moving in 2024 to make even more decentralized. And as a tangible, real example, we are adding consensus incentives, so people will get rewarded for creating blocks. And unlike nearly every cryptocurrency that I'm aware of out there, you don't get paid at the moment to create blocks in Algorand or to validate or mint transactions or mine transactions. And so we're moving to a technology we're calling consensus incentives, where on a per block basis, folks will get paid for staking on the network. And we're also, again, in trying to be real about this, moving from our existing model that's a kind of a hub and spoke where we use relays to propagate data across the network graph. We're now moving to a peer-to-peer data propagation strategy using lib peer-to-peer. And so there's definitely things we can do to improve the decentralization, but ultimately I think if you look at some of the things that get thrown around by the fudders, it tends to be outdated stuff or stuff that's just misconceptions on their part.
Yeah, and Stephen, I'm sure you're also probably in the same camp sometimes when it comes to maybe people getting things wrong. I'm not saying I'm perfect, by the way. Nobody's perfect in covering all these projects. Sometimes they are quite confusing. But Stephen, if there's anything there that has bothered you around Arbitrum's coverage or misconceptions to clarify.
Yeah, one of the things that bothers me is I think people tend to lump all L2s together and take us for the worst, offenders in the ecosystem and just apply that standard to all of them. What I mean by that is, for example, Arbitrum has always been security first, decentralization first. What that means is, the fraud proofs that actually secure the network have been live from day one. There are validators that prevent the sequencer from going rogue and doing things. Even though the sequencer itself, ordering is centralized, it can't push bad transactions or that. There are other projects in the L2 space that don't have these proofs live, that have a sequencer that can do sorts of dictatorship and the like. And my goal here is not to call those out, but I think people sometimes aren't nuanced. They'll say things like, hey, all layer 2s are centralized. All layer 2s are controlled by a multi-sig. And in reality, in our Arbitrum case, I don't have a multi-sig. I don't have any keys to the Arbitrum public networks at all. And it's self-executing governance with a community-elected security council. So really, really strong decentralization. And people, I think, need to be more nuanced. And sometimes an easy talking point, because you can point to one, you have your straw man, and you can say, okay, look, all Ethereum L2s are bad because of this one. But I think understanding that Arbitrum stands out with the way that it decentralizes technology, it decentralizes its governance of the public chains, which I think stand out a lot. And to something John said before, I think people also need to understand there's a spectrum here, and we can disagree vehemently, but ultimately, we are in the spectrum of decentralization, and we're trying out different things. We believe very, very strongly in the extreme decentralization, but we also realize, and I realize even so, that decentralization is a means to an end, not the end itself. We believe that decentralization is the best way to build a system that you can't seize assets, from, that can't be censored, that has, protection from different attacks. But ultimately, that's the goal. And if you can build a network that does that with somewhere else on a decentralization standard, if you can achieve those goals, then you're okay too. And so we're doing it the best way we know how. But ultimately, I think the whole community is better by people experimenting in different parts of the spectrum, what works and what achieves the ultimate goal, which is building a system that protects users. Decentralization is the key. We know how to get there, but maybe there are other ways, and people should experiment.
So just and to build on that, and I agree. I think we should be building on each other's shoulders. I mean, and that's how modern software is built. I mean, I think it's very important that we harness like the best of each of the projects and try to work with each other. Which is why I love to see permissive licensing on open source software, etc. And I think we can do better there. And also, last thing I just wanted to say is that just again agreeing. I think if you're not decentralized, or you're certainly not, you're not on track with it, or you're not tending towards it, if you're not really permissionless, if you're not really censorship resistant, there's no point in using a decentralized platform like Algorand, Arbitrum, or otherwise to build your app. If those platforms are not aligned to that value proposition, because it's just a pain in the ass, you're better off using GCP or AWS and building it in a traditional backend. And so, folks, please use quality projects. Arbitrum is one, I think. Cardano is one. Algorand is one. There's others out there, but do use quality projects when you're building, because otherwise you're wasting your time.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most exciting things, honestly, and one of the most rewarding is having you guys on the spotlight. Some of the details around here to educate our community and educate everybody, really, which is what we're here to do. And again, not really. There's no vested interest here. I honestly don't know how it's going to go, nor do I necessarily think that it matters all that much, because we've had you guys both on today to talk about it and dig a little bit deeper into your guys' projects. So I do appreciate you guys coming on. And again, congratulate you, by the way, because there are a lot more than 16 projects in the crypto space, and there was no economic incentive for any of our community members to nominate either Arbitrum or Algorand. There is an incentive to fill out a bracket and choose how these games are going to go. People can win a quarter of an ETH by doing so at Coinage.media. So I would say that much. And again, minting an NFT goes straight into the DAO and supports the coverage we're able to put out. So I appreciate all of you for enabling this, really. And John and Steven, I can't thank you enough for coming on, because it's very easy to maybe not talk about some of these things, or not maybe, I guess, spend the time educating people. But you guys came on today, and I really do appreciate that. And hopefully we'll be spotlighting one of your guys' projects again soon as this unfolds to wrap up the year. But congrats to you both. Congrats to all the builders in Arbitrum and Algorand for making it possible to have you guys up here as a crypto project of the year. That's going to do it for us on this one little slice of what we got for crypto project of the year. You can go to Coinage.media to vote now, support these communities, and move them forward. For John, for Steven, and for myself here, thanks everybody for tuning in and listening to us. Head to Coinage.media for more, and have a great rest of your day.